Hello, whisperers. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy tonight's tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps more than you know. Now, dim the lights, and let's begin tonight's story. I had walked those streets for centuries. Cobblestones paved over, steel and glass towers stabbing the sky, neon humming where gas lamps once flickered. Cities changed, but hunger never did, mine least of all. It always began in my chest like a furnace, an ache that grew with every passing hour. I could walk among mortals in daylight with shaded glasses and a lowered head, but when the sun died, so did my restraint. Hunger owned me. That night, the air tasted wrong. I knew the city's scents like scripture: urine in alley gutters, roasted meat carts, perfume bleeding from clubs. But beneath it all lingered something sharper, metallic, sour, a tang of death too fresh to belong in a morgue. I stalked an alley where drunkards usually stumbled after midnight. Easy prey. A young man pushed out the back door of a club, phone glowing in his hand. His jugular thrummed in the night air like a drum. Hunger dug its claws into my ribs. I was on him before the door swung shut. My teeth slid in. The first gush of blood flooded my mouth, warm, arterial, life itself. But something was wrong. Instead of sweet heat, it tasted rancid, thick, acrid, like spoiled meat poured through copper. My body recoiled, but hunger commanded me deeper. I drank until bile rose in my throat. Then he shuddered. His eyes rolled white, skin paling beneath my grip. Not the pale of death. This was different. Veins blackened like cracks in porcelain. He spasmed, jaw unhinging wider than bone should allow. A sound tore from his throat, not a scream, not a moan, but a wet, tearing shriek that made even my dead nerves twitch. I dropped him. He didn't collapse like prey should. He snapped upright, limbs jerking, lips peeled back to show gums flooding with blood. His eyes were empty, hungry, dead and alive all at once. The boy lunged at me, faster than he should have been, stronger. His teeth snapped against my cheek, almost piercing through immortal flesh. I slammed him into the wall so hard the brick cracked, but he clawed for me still, fingers raking deep into my throat. Warm blood sprang across my collar. For the first time in a century, I felt fear. I ripped his head clean from his shoulders, spine tearing free with a wet schluck. Blood painted the wall in an arc. His body thrashed headless, clawing until I stomped it flat into meat. Even then, his jaws kept snapping, head rolling in the gutter like a rabid dog. Something new had entered my city, something that didn't bow to death. I leapt to a rooftop. Below, the streets writhed with chaos. People screamed, scattered, fought. A man stumbled from a bar, chest torn wide open, ribs like snapped piano keys. He fell, then rose, intestines dragging like wet rope. A woman cradled her lover, only for his face to cave inward with a sickening crunch as he bit her throat out in one ragged pull. Blood fountained, flesh tore, the city drowned in crimson, and everywhere I looked, prey that should have died, didn't. The air filled with wet gnashing and screams cut short. Their blood was foul, black syrup running down the gutters. My hunger raged. but every taste I had that night curdled me from the inside. I had seen plagues before. The Black Death had emptied villages, left me to feed on corpses too cold to bother with. Cholera left streets running with waste. Influenza made graveyards overflow. But even then, death was predictable, final. The dying coughed, bled, begged, and then they were gone. This was different. Death had learned to mock me. I had thought I was eternal, the true predator. But the city showed me otherwise. That night, the dead rose, and they were hungry too. Sirens had braided themselves through the night by the time I crossed the rooftops. Red and blue pulsed off glass like veins under skin. Smoke curled from 3 separate fires. Somewhere far off, a helicopter dipped behind a building and did not rise again. I tasted copper on the wind and ash on my tongue. The city had always been loud, but panic made a different kind of noise. Short, bitten-off sounds, the thud of bodies meeting concrete, the wet percussion of teeth through flesh. I told myself to be methodical. Hunger had made fools of my kind long before mortals learned to name us. Find clean prey, feed, disappear, simple. But the alley boy's blood still burned in my throat like poison, and the world below writhed like a nest someone had kicked open. I dropped to a parking garage where the air was cooler and the shadows deeper. Tires squealed, horns sobbed, shoes slapped concrete. I found a woman braced between 2 cars, her hands pressed to a wound at her thigh that leaked through her fingers in bright ribbons. She smelled human. Terrified, yes, but human. I stepped in behind her, a whisper of leather and breath. Quiet, I said, because habit was a gentler jailer than I would ever be. My teeth found the artery at her neck as precisely as a key finds a lock. Warmth surged and curdled. Not rancid yet, not like the boy, but wrong, as if the sweetness had been skimmed off and replaced with tin and rot. Her pulse stuttered, her breath hitched into a rattle. I swallowed once, twice. On the third, I felt a tremor ripple beneath her skin, a crawling, like flies hatching inside the vein. I tore away. She sagged against the car door, eyes glassy, mouth opening and closing on a word she had forgotten. The wound at her thigh stopped bleeding. The skin around it puckered, black threads spidering outward beneath the surface. Her hands fell. Her head turned toward me with a hinge creak. Hunger emptied out of her gaze, and something simpler moved in. Appetite without person. She lunged. I hammered her face into the window hard enough to spiderweb the glass. She didn't scream. Her lips split. 2 teeth skittered across the hood and clinked into the gutter. She came again with both hands, nails dragging 4 bright lines down my jaw. I drove my arm through her chest and closed a fist around her heart. It beat twice against my palm, defiant little drum, and I tore it free. Steam curled in the garage chill. She blinked. Then she bit at me, head jerking like a striking dog, even as the hole where her heart had been dribbled dark syrup down her shirt. I crushed the heart in my hand, and the meat sloughed between my fingers. No, I said, not to her, to the world, and snapped her neck. She still twitched until I twisted her head completely off and set it down by the tire like a grotesque offering. Her mouth clicked open and shut, working at air that could never feed her. A scream pitched up from the ramp, then footsteps, many slapping in unison. They came around the bend as one flexible body, 10, 12, maybe more, fresh enough that they still wore club bracelets and lipstick, a bachelorette sash, a bartender's apron. Their eyes were the same emptiness. Their mouths worked the same hungry chew. They smelled me, and the heads all tilted a fraction, the way wolves do when a rabbit bolts. They didn't scatter for the living who sprinted by. They came for me. I learned something important in that first rush. Whatever animus rode them sharpened on me like a knife on bone. They tasted my difference and desired it. They came in a wet, hard wave. I met them with speed and old violence. Jaws cracked in my hands like walnuts. I tore arms free at the shoulder and beat their owners back with their own limbs. A heel went through an eye. A skull burst against a pillar like a greedy fruit. I wrenched one by the jaw until the mandible came free with an elastic pop and threw it spinning. It clacked along the concrete and disappeared under a sedan. Even with their faces pulped and their rib cages open like gates, they clawed toward my heat. I stomped and crushed and ripped until the floor shivered with the weight of it, and the garage reeked of hot copper and something blacker, colder, like coins left too long in the mouth. When the last crawler dragged itself by 2 fingers toward my ankle, I pinned its hand with my heel and twisted until bone corkscrewed out of skin. It snapped at my calf. I kicked its head across the lane and it rolled, bumping softly against the lip of the ramp. I climbed back into the night, breathing harder than I cared to admit. On the avenue, a police cruiser fishtailed and slammed into a bus stop. The officer inside struggled free, one arm hanging wrong, the other fumbling for his radio. His throat called to me with that old simple promise, feed and mend. He looked up and saw me as I fell from the roofline, wide eyes, hope curdled with terror. He was young. He would have tasted sweet in any other century. "Please," he said, the word shredded by pain. The cut at his forearm had already stopped bleeding. The flesh around it had gone waxy. The fingers on that hand twitched in a rhythm out of time with his heart. I did not drink. I took his head instead, as mercifully as I could, and laid the weight of his body across the seat, so the next thing that saw him would not see his face. "You're learnin' restraint late," someone said. I turned. He stood on the cruiser's hood like a cathedral gargoyle, immaculate despite the gore below. Younger than me, most are, hair combed too carefully, suit fitted too well. His eyes were the pale gray of ash, the first of my kind I had seen that night. "Restraint," I said, "keeps you from rotting when the banquet spoils." He smiled with only his teeth. "Rot is for the poor." He blurred off the hood, seized a woman staggering past with blood down her blouse, and sank his mouth to her throat. She thrashed once, then went slack. He drank in great, greedy pulls, shuddering like a lover. I watched his cheeks flush with counterfeit life. "Careful," I said. "Listen." He didn't. He tore himself free to breathe, and in that breath the woman's fingers flexed. The tendons in her neck stood like cables. The whites of her eyes filmed gray. She moved her head the way the others had. A blind scenting, and closed on his mouth. Her teeth cut his lower lip. He jerked, more surprised than hurt. Black traced through the veins at his throat like ink spilled in water. He looked at me then, not at her, and in his gaze I saw comprehension slide into place like a blade. He reached into her mouth, seized her tongue, and ripped it out. She kept biting. He flung the tongue away, gagging around his own blood. The ink in his veins thickened, branching, creeping for his jaw. "Help me," he said. He had the false grace of a young predator who had never been forced to consider the end of himself until it lay down in his lap. I took his head as cleanly as I had taken the officer's. The body folded. The woman crawled toward it and gnawed at the stump like a pup at a teat. More came, some living still, some no longer, a few of ours, reckless, greedy, fooled by the human heat still trapped in cooling skin. I watched two neonates tangle with a pack at the mouth of a subway. For a glorious handful of seconds, they were exquisite. Speed and precision and old cruelty married to young joy, until the mass closed over them in a churning, slick tide. You can be strong enough to break a spine one-handed and still drown if the ocean is made of teeth. I broke a path toward a building whose mirrored face I had watched rise from scaffolds a decade ago. My claws found ledges and window frames. The glass threw me back at myself in red and blue cuts. Halfway up, a man's body hit the sidewalk with a sound you feel more than hear. I did not look down. The city stank of open bodies. It shone in places with the shine of fresh meat. From above, it seemed almost beautiful, like a harvest. On the roof, the wind moved the smoke into soft shapes. I could see far, freeways clotted with abandoned cars, an overpass jammed with a single long serpent of people, a stadium throwing up its lights and then letting them die in sections, as if someone were putting out candles one by one. The infection spread along streets the way fire eats through dry grass. Patch, leap, patch, always faster where the wind blew strongest. I had seen cities burn before, watched plagues turn doorways into altars, but those deaths had honored a ritual. The body failed, the breath left, the eyes closed. This thing had no ritual. It made a mockery of endings. Below, heads turned up toward me, not the living. Them, dozens, then more. Faces lifted in unison, nostrils flaring, mouths opening, hands reaching. The new hunger pointed as one needle. I felt it prick my skin. Some began to climb. Fire escapes, scaffolds, anything. Not smoothly, not well, but with a stubbornness that had no fear of falling. The first edge of dawn bruised the clouds. I felt it before I saw it, an ache across my back, a whisper of heat licking old scars. I had hours at best, and not so many of those. I needed darkness, stone, a place to wait the day out while the city remade itself into a throat. I looked down at what had been mine for so long and understood that I would not feed here again the way I had fed for centuries. The blood had turned to baited hooks. The dead had learned a new trick, and it was making more of itself faster than my hunger could count. I dropped from the roof to the next, then to a billboard, metal rattling. As I fell, the chorus followed me, those raking hands, those gnashing teeth, that single unmusical note that filled the streets and bounced off the glass and climbed the sky like smoke. I had thought I knew what it meant to be hunted. I had not. When my feet hit the final ledge above the avenue and I ran for the dark mouth of an old district that still remembered stone, I told myself a simple truth I had not needed in 100 years. Survive the night first. Choose what to become later. I hit the street again, and the city was unrecognizable. Cars were wedged nose to nose across intersections. Fires crawled up brick walls, and the air itself felt swollen with blood and smoke. I had lived through wars, riots, and plagues, but never had I seen a city unravel in a single night. Hunger gnawed at me, sharp and endless, yet the memory of that rancid blood still soured my mouth. The dead noticed me almost immediately. They turned their heads in eerie unison, nostrils flaring, teeth snapping at air. They did not hesitate. Dozens broke into a sprint, their fresh muscles propelling them faster than mortals. The living screamed and scattered, but the horde ignored them. They came for me. I met them in the street, beside a stalled bus. The first one lunged, jaw unhinged, wider than it should have gone. I caught his head and crushed it against the glass until his skull split and sprayed the seats inside. A woman in sequins slammed into my back, clawing for my throat. I seized her arm, twisted until the bone burst, then hurled her through the windshield. Another leapt onto my shoulders. His teeth dug into my collarbone until I ripped his lower face away, teeth and tongue dangling from my fingers. They didn't stop. I tore bodies in half, shattered ribs with my fists, snapped necks, but the swarm poured on, heedless of pain or loss. Killing them was labor, not victory. Even as black syrup painted my hands and boots, their hands clawed for me, their mouths grinding at air that smelled of my blood. For the first time in centuries, I felt hunted. I shoved free of the bus and bolted for the nearest stone refuge, a church. The double doors were chained and braced with wood, but I broke through in a single shoulder strike. Survivors gasped inside, half a dozen souls clinging to candles and barricades. A janitor clutched a ring of keys like prayer beads. A woman in scrubs had her arm around a man bleeding from his side. Another held a bat so tightly his knuckles shone white. They stared at me with that desperate, pitiful hope only the dying ever have. "Behind me," I said, because I knew how to sound like salvation. The dead burst through after me, the nave filled with gnashing mouths and dragging feet. I met them at the aisle, cracking skulls together, tearing jaws off, stomping their faces into the slate floor. Blood sprayed across the pews in wide arcs. Limbs flailed even after I'd ripped them off, hands clutching at my ankles as if the body refused to admit it was gone. A survivor screamed as one of the creatures got too close. I tore it off him and snapped its spine against a column, throwing the twitching body into the next wave. They kept coming, spilling through the doorway like meat poured through a funnel. I waded into them until the floor shone slick with gore. Candlelight jittered off the mess, casting our shadows long and obscene up the walls. My strength was endless, but even I knew this could not go on forever. When the last of them was put down, silence fell, save for the low, panicked breaths of the living, their eyes fixed on me. The janitor raised a crucifix from his keys with a trembling hand. It meant nothing. Symbols had never burned me. but the weight of his belief pressed like a change in the weather. The man with the bat whispered, "What are you?" "Useful," I said. The woman in scrubs glanced at the bite torn into my calf, then at the black veins spreading up the arm of the man she tended. "You were bitten," she said. I looked down at the crescent scars, blood still slick on my skin. "I do not get what you get," I said. "If I did, I would already be one of them." Their fear sharpened. I let my lips curl back just enough for them to glimpse my teeth. The man with the bat flinched. The janitor clutched his cross tighter. Then I heard it. A howl rose through the city, long, low, carried by smoke and night. Another answered, then another. They wove together into a chorus that rolled across the rooftops like storm surf. "Of course. Mongrels," I muttered. "Filthy beasts." Of course they'd crawl from their dens now, eager to scavenge the chaos. The Batman paled. "Wolves?" "Something that pretends to be," I said. "Stay off the streets if you value what's left of you. They'll feast as gladly as the dead." The survivors exchanged looks, terror splitting them into silence. Outside, the dead pounded on the doors again. Wood splintered, nails screeched. The barricade trembled under the weight. I could already imagine what would happen when the werewolves followed the scent here, two hungers colliding over scraps of human flesh. I turned back to the survivors. Their faces were pale in the candlelight. They looked at me as if I were a question no one wanted answered. "We cannot stay," I told them. "When they climb the roof, they'll drop in like rain. And when the mongrels arrive, there will be nothing left to save." The woman in scrubs tightened her grip on her patient. The janitor nodded faintly, keys rattling in his hand. The man with the bat swallowed hard, but stayed close. "Where do we go?" he asked. "Down," I said, gesturing toward the sacristy's narrow passage. "The city above belongs to hunger now. Best we find another path, before dawn finds me." The pounding grew louder. Splinters rained from the doors. The howls rose again, nearer this time, sharp and eager. I bared my teeth, not in a smile, but in promise. Let's see which hunger wins first. The sacristy's passage yawned like a throat. I led them in single file, stone dripping with cold, the air sour with mildew and candle smoke. Their breaths rasped behind me, quick and shallow. I could hear the dead above us battering at the doors, the hinges screaming like tortured things. For now, the stone held. For now. We emerged into a forgotten stairwell that spit us out blocks away. The street was worse than before. Fires painted the sky orange, smoke draped over everything like funeral cloth. Cars burned in snarls of twisted steel. Corpses hung from broken windows where they'd tried to escape. The moans of the horde carried like a chorus of hunger. The survivors clung to me, their fragile hope balanced on the same razor as my patience. Hunger ate at me with every breath. Each heartbeat I heard behind me was a drum calling me to drink, but I couldn't. Their blood was a trap now, poison disguised as salvation. The dead smelled me. They always did. Heads snapped toward me, jaws snapping with crackling hunger. Dozens broke into a run, then hundreds. A flood of fresh corpses poured from alleys, doorways, and shattered glass fronts. They came fast, too fast for mortals to outrun. "Stay behind me," I growled, and tore into the first wave. A man in a blood-stained hoodie launched at me. I caught him midair, ripped him in half, and threw the pieces into the crowd. Another sank teeth into my shoulder. I crushed his skull between my palms until it collapsed like wet clay. Black gore splashed the pavement, slippery under my boots. They didn't stop. They never stopped. Every time I broke one, 3 more clawed forward. Their blood painted my arms to the elbows, thick and stinking, spattering my face in sticky sheets. Behind me, the Batman screamed and swung, wood cracking bone. The woman in scrubs dragged her wounded charge, teeth clenched, hair plastered to her cheeks. The janitor prayed under his breath, his keys rattling like tiny bells. I carved us a path with claws and fury. Bodies split, jaws cracked, spines snapped. Still the horde pressed closer, so many hands clawing at me I could barely move. And then I heard them. Howls, close now, long and triumphant. The mongrels came out of the smoke like nightmares clothed in fur and fang. Towering shapes, muscles swollen under gray hide, claws like knives. Their eyes burned with that animal fire I had always despised. They fell upon the horde with savage joy, ripping limbs free, tearing heads from shoulders, howling as blood sprayed in red arcs across the night. "Mongrels," I spat, "filthy beasts, always eager to wallow when the slaughter comes." One bounded past me, jaws clamping onto a zombie's torso. With a single wrench, it tore the corpse in half, intestines snapping wetly as the pieces fell. Another slammed into a knot of 10, scattering them like dolls, then pounced on the twitching remains. Their savagery was crude, undisciplined, but effective. The survivors stared, frozen between terror and awe. The woman in scrubs whispered, "They're saving us." I laughed, sharp and cold. They are feeding, nothing more. Wolves do not save sheep. The battle devolved into chaos. Zombies and werewolves tangled in knots of fur, teeth, and gore. Bodies flew, blood spattered the walls, howls and shrieks filled the air. I cut through the tide, a weapon honed by centuries, while the beasts reveled in their frenzy. For a moment the street itself seemed to breathe, each inhale a scream, each exhale a spray of blood. One of the mongrels turned on me. Its muzzle was painted red, its teeth still grinding human bone. It sniffed, and in its eyes I saw recognition, not kinship, but competition. Predator to predator, it lunged. I met it head-on, claws carving across its chest. Flesh split, muscle peeled back, but it kept coming. It knocked me into a wall, bricks cracking around my shoulders. Its jaws closed on my throat, hot breath reeking of carrion. I rammed my hand through its ribcage and crushed its heart. It convulsed, jaws snapping inches from my face before I tore its carcass free and flung it into the mob. The survivors screamed behind me. I turned in time to see the Batman dragged down, teeth sinking into his chest as he vanished under the swarm, his cries cut off in a gurgle. The woman in scrubs tried to pull her patient away, but a wolf barreled into them both, jaws closing on her head. It popped like overripe fruit. The janitor swung his keys wildly, shouting prayers. before the dead ripped him apart in 3 different directions. I alone remained. The street was carpeted in ruin, torn corpses, shredded fur, heaps of twitching limbs. Wolves tore zombies apart, zombies tore wolves down, and through it all, I carved my own bloody path. But even as I killed, the truth pressed in. This was not victory. This was hunger, devouring hunger. 1,000 maws chewing at a city until nothing remained. The howls rose again, mingled with the screams of the dying. The horizon glowed with approaching dawn. I felt the ache of it already, crawling under my skin, whispering of ash. I climbed atop a wrecked car, the city burning around me. Wolves howled. The dead moaned. Smoke smeared the stars from the sky. I thought myself eternal. I said into the fire and the gore, the true predator. I looked down at my blood-caked hands, the black gore dripping between my fingers. But tonight, I bled. The sun began to rise, pale light licking the rooftops. It should have terrified me. Instead, I almost welcomed it. Better to burn than to kneel in this new kingdom of rot. Yet the night would come again. And when it did, so would I.